there are so many parts of your dad's character in you, clearly. I mean, do you feel that? Did you, when you wrote this obituary, did you feel that really quite intensely?
Well, you know, you pointed to that detail with regards to these rifles. Like, my father had 300 rifles. This was a real obsession, and he was a very good shot. He was a provincial level shot. And it took me 30 years to figure out why the hell he collected those guns. I don't think he knew. And I told him 5 years ago, I said, Dad, I figured out why you're so obsessed with rifles. I said, it's because you want to hit the target dead center with one shot. And that's like, it's a symbolic representation of your aim in life. And he thought about that. And my dad wasn't particularly metaphysically oriented. And that was an explanation he was entirely satisfied with. Right? And you know, the word sin means to miss the mark, right? It means to miss the target. And that's acted out in this, it was acted out in my dad's life in this relationship that he had with guns. And he, as a hunter, it was the same thing. He hunted with a single shot rifle. You got one shot, you got one chance to hit the mark. And he was very dedicated towards that kind of precision. That was part of what gave him that rough edge. He had very high standards, a very encouraging person. He believed that, he imbued me with the belief that I could do anything I set my mind to, but that didn't make him someone who was easy to please. Quite the contrary. It was a very remarkable combination. And I was very fortunate, my father, you know, I knew, and my mother as well, my parents were 100% behind the best part of me. Unbelievably useful. And that's something I've been able to offer many people, you know, as, what would you say, an abstract or virtualized father, and that's a great honor.
But to lose both your parents in the space of 6 months at your age is a really, I'm very fortunate. Both my parents are still alive. I spent the weekend with them. It's a huge moment in your life, isn't it? How are you dealing with it?
Well, my brother and my sister were there with me when my father died. And, you know, we've drawn more closely together in consequence of that. It's shared loss. And I saw that happen with Tammy when her mom and dad died, that her family drew together, and Tammy, for example, established a much better relationship with her older brother, and that was not a substitute for her father, obviously, but a very positive alternative. And so we've found solace in each other, my sister and my brother, and drawn more closely together, and that's been very good. And none of us are naive, you know. I mean, our parents were getting old, and I would say we were also fortunate in some ways. My mother was very vital, right? Literally till the day she died. She had a heart attack, and then 2 days later another, but she was a young and vivacious person despite being in her 80s, and then bowed out with no fuss and very suddenly. And my father as well, you know, I mean, I've watched people deteriorate for sometimes decades in old folks' homes, and both my parents departed from life in a relatively, what would you say, in a relatively suffering-free manner, and so we're grateful for that. And it is a terrible thing to see someone that you love die, and there's always the sense that you have that there was perhaps more that you could have done. You know, I wonder, I suppose, in an ultimate sense, whether the fact that we die is in some way the ultimate moral failure. I mean, that's a preposterous thing to think, but that's the sort of thought that plagues you when you see someone that you love die. But they lived good lives, and they were probably both in some ways ready to go. And so it was far less terrible than it might have been. And I was fortunate to be surrounded by people who, instead of making it hell, did everything they could to make it better. And I have drawn closer to my brother and sister in consequence, and I suspect that will continue. And I told my father that very shortly before he died. You know, one of the things I did, Piers, that maybe the people who are listening would be interested in is, like, probably 15 years ago, I counted all the times I would see my parents before they died. And it was about 15 times at that point, because I saw them about twice a year or something like that, because we lived quite distant. I phoned them and so on. But, you know, it's very useful to take stock and to understand that, you know, as your parents age, the number of times that you see them decreases very dramatically. And you need to know that, because then you don't waste the time when you have it. And I don't think we wasted the time that we had together. I took my mother to Australia on the tour with me, and to Iceland, and she had a very good adventure. And I spent a lot of time with my dad. So neither my sister, my brother, and I, we really didn't come to the end of our parents' lives with regrets, thank God.